Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining us from different parts of the world. And welcome to today's webinar, From Tiananmen Square to Transnational Repression, China's Assault on the Right to Protest. My name is I-Chen Liu, and I am the Program Officer for Asia at Article 19, and I will be your moderator for this session today. And while we are still sorting some technical issues with our presenters today, I would just want to make a quick note that today's webinar is being recorded for documentation and public dissemination. And if that is okay with everyone, we will continue with the recording. And we are very happy to gather here today on June 4th, the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, an event that not only marked a brutal crackdown on peaceful protests, but also the remarkable courage of the people. Today's conversation is also the launch of our new Article 19 report, part of our global Free to Protest campaign. This campaign calls on policymakers, the media, the law enforcement to uphold human rights and protect the right to protest, guarded by Article 19's principle on the right to protest. Our new report, titled Going Global, China's Transnational Repression of the Protesters Worldwide, explored how the Chinese state, through surveillance, intimidation, collective punishments, and technological pressure, seeks to silence dissent beyond its borders. Today's sessions will begin with an overview, followed by discussion with our speakers on key aspects of transnational repressions, from the legacy of Tiananmen and the white paper protests to digital surveillance, collective punishments, and the psychological and gendered impact of the overseas movement. To help us unpack these issues, we are joined by a remarkable group of speakers whose experience, advocacy, and research offers powerful insight into China's global repression of protest. Zhou Fengsuo is the Executive Director of Human Rights in China and the President of Humanitarian in China. He was a student leader during the 1989 Tiananmen protests and remained one of the most prominent voices in defending democratic freedoms for Chinese diaspora. Zumretay Arkin is a Uyghur activist and Vice President of the World Uyghur Congress. I-Chen is a former team lead at Doublethink Lab and an advisor to Hong Kong Alliance Canada. And Michael Castor, head of Article 19's Global China program, who will open with a presentation of our new report. And thank you again for joining us for this important discussion. And with that, I will now turn it over to Michael to present the report and set the stage for today's conversation. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks a lot. I-Chen, can you maybe try to help Fengsuo to get connected in also? He's still having some technical issues.
Of course.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining. And again, just to extend my warm thanks to my fellow speakers. On June 4th, 1989, PLA soldiers advanced into Tiananmen Square, brutally suppressing the pro-democracy protest movement that had been swelling around the country for months. 36 years later, China is now waging a global campaign of transnational repression against protesters critical of the Chinese Communist Party. Overseas Chinese dissidents, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and other diaspora activists and allies know all too well the cost of protesting against China's authoritarianism. Going Global, China's transnational repression of protesters around the world, examines how the People's Republic of China has engaged in a systematic international campaign of transnational repression targeting protesters critical of the Chinese Communist Party. While acknowledging and drawing from the existing base of research on broader trends in transnational repression, we set out with this report to fill a gap in specific documentation of transnational repression against the right to protest. Our report draws on existing research and new interviews with overseas protesters, documenting protests by people from China and Hong Kong, East Turkestan, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, and the targeting of protesters in Taiwan. The report looks at cases from 2011 to 2025 in 12 countries in Asia, Europe, and North America. And we hope that it will be a valuable contribution to understanding China's broader transnational repression, but also specifically as relates to protest and its global assault on the freedom of expression. China has experienced a number of high-profile protests domestically over the past 30 years, which, following crackdowns and censorship at home, have inspired solidarity protests globally. At the same time, waves of ongoing human rights abuses in China give rise to new protest actions overseas. As the CCP has cracked down on and censored discussion of protest at home, it has also escalated acts of transnational repression, targeting overseas protest movements who seek to raise awareness of human rights abuses in China or to commemorate protest and crackdown anniversaries. From 1989 to demonstrations in Lhasa and Urumqi in 2008 and 2009, to the 2019 pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, or the 2022 nationwide white paper protests. As we know, China is not alone in acts of transnational repression. Iran, Russia, others also are perpetrators. But as Safeguard Defenders, a leader in tracking China's broader transnational repression, notes, the sheer scale of its operations make it by far the most prolific perpetrator. The CCP perpetrates transnational repression through a diverse ecosystem of government agents, institutions, and proxies, from the Ministry of State or Public Security, embassies, consular officials, and online influencers. And this decentralized approach sometimes makes it difficult to provide concrete evidence of Chinese officials or their proxies' direct role. And this intentionally complicates more direct attribution of state responsibility behind such human rights abuses. Now, when it comes to transnational repression targeting global protest, one of the most influential entities, and by design often least attributable, is the United Front system, which is responsible for overseas Chinese affairs and ethnic and religious issues, among others. And in the report in particular, we highlight a number of varied United Front entanglements during protest. Our findings show that Chinese leaders' visits are among the most common targets of protest and pro-CCP counter-protests. This emphasizes the responsibility of host countries' governments to ensure that their preparations for Chinese leaders' visits support the right to protest, including by increasing resources to prevent transnational repression and to provide access to remedy. Of course, one of the most emblematic recent cases is the coordinated pro-CCP counter-protests and violence during the 2003 San Francisco APEC summit, which has been really well documented in a report last year by Hong Kong Democracy Council and Students for a Free Tibet. And so because of this, I'd like to mention a different case in New Zealand that we also include in the report. In 2024, when Chinese Premier Li Qiang visited Auckland, he met with New Zealand Prime Minister. On 14 June, amid a larger crowd of some 200 pro-CCP demonstrators waving Chinese flags and the like, Xing Jian and Michael Zhuang protested outside the hotel where Li Qiang was staying. They were carrying a Taiwanese flag, marching through the crowd chanting, "Freedom and independence for Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet, Uyghurs, and for China." They were attacked. Xing shared a screenshot with Article 19 of a WeChat group calling on overseas Chinese students to volunteer to, quote, show patriotic enthusiasm, create a friendly atmosphere between China and New Zealand, and welcome, quote, our motherland during the premier's visit. The notice said that organizers would express sincere gratitude by providing 3 meals during the event and issuing, quote, surprise thank you letters to all volunteers, i.e. financial compensation. And this same tactic was reported in other instances, such as by the Chinese consulate in Los Angeles, again during APEC the year before. The message that was shared included a link to a Google Forms registration crediting CSSA, or the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, which is a major coordinator of United Front work among overseas students. Xing also recounted seeing banners of United Front affiliated organizations at the protest, and noting that one of the assailants was the former chairman of the New Zealand Association for Promoting Peaceful Reunification of China, a documented United Front organization. Now, another flashpoint in protest is around sensitive anniversaries, as noted, such as Tiananmen. We examined one case from Taiwan. The Chinese Unification Promotion Party, or CUPP in Taiwan, was founded in 2005 by Cheng Anle, also known as the White Wolf, in Guangdong. Well, he was living there as a fugitive. The CUPP has documented ties to organized crime and has engaged in various forms of violence. Its establishment in China, preoccupation with reunification, and subversive and destabilizing tactics bear the hallmarks, again, of United Front activity. In Taiwan, CUPP proxies have been reported attending demonstrations in support of Taiwan, the annual Tiananmen Square massacre memorialization, or other protests, where they pretend to be supporters. They create disturbances, they intimidate others while filming and trying to spread disinformation or to discredit the protests. A couple of years ago, in June 2022, suspected CUPP agitators vandalized a replica of the Pillar of Shame sculpture in Taipei. Another key site of transnational repression against protest is outside of embassies and consulates, with embassy and consular officials themselves participating in acts of harassment and violence. Now, while Bob Chan's case outside the consulate in Manchester is probably well known, we also point to a number of other cases in our report pointing to a trend. Baibolat Kunbolat, an ethnic Kazakh who immigrated from China with his wife and 3 children to Kazakhstan in 2002, is emblematic. Ethnic Kazakhs comprise about 1.6 million of the population in East Turkestan, and as with Uyghurs, many are forcibly detained in camps. In Kazakhstan, the PRC has invested considerable economic and political capital in pursuing influence, in part to quell protest of family members of the imprisoned across the border. Baibolat, for several years, had been organizing regular protests outside the embassy and consulate, protesting for his brother detained in China. In early 2024, following ongoing transnational repression, he and his family fled Kazakhstan, with Baibolat remarking, quote, "Because I protested outside the Chinese embassy in Kazakhstan, I believe that it's the Chinese government that put pressure on the Kazakh government to target me. As it has threatened my family, I have no choice but to find ways to flee Kazakhstan." The Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy has documented cases of intimidation against Tibetans protesting outside consulates and embassies. Tenzin Dawa, TCHRD executive director, has also shared cases of Chinese consular officials intimidating Tibetan protesters when they are applying for visas to visit relatives back home. Officials will ask visa applicants not only about their own personal information, but also about the broader Tibetan community, the kinds of events like protests that might be taking place, or the identity of active community members. In other cases, consular officials have explicitly told Tibetan visa applicants to abandon their protest activities if they wanted a visa to the PRC to visit relatives. Tibetans have also noted being photographed outside of embassies, only later to have those photographs shown to their relatives by police in China. Escalation of transnational repression has likewise seen increasing collective punishment targeting family members for actions of the diaspora. While this is most pronounced for Uyghur and Tibetan protesters, it's increasingly being noted by the Hong Kong diaspora. A recent example, following a protest earlier this year in London, outside of the planned mega embassy, on 10 February, Hong Kong National Security Police took away UK-based Carmen Lau of Hong Kong Democracy Council's aunt and uncle for questioning. Speaking to Radio Free Asia, she said that the timing and intent behind this move are quite obvious, coming after our meeting with the Foreign Secretary and protest against the Chinese Super Embassy. Abdurrahim Ghani fled persecution in East Turkestan in 2007 and resettled in the Netherlands. In 2008, he started a weekly protest in Amsterdam, and later he started regular protests in front of the Chinese embassy. From May to July of 2024, Ghani says Chinese police on several occasions had temporarily freed and forced family members to call him ahead of protests planned for Paris or Amsterdam. When he refused to cancel demonstrations, they were re-imprisoned. In September of 2024, his father died in one such camp. The PRC also engages in wide-scale digital transnational repression, well documented by many, such as Tibet Action Institute or Citizen Lab. Our report specifically identifies cases of censorship, online harassment and threats, surveillance, and other forms of targeted cyber attack, and information manipulation as key tactics in digital transnational repression against protesters. We documented cases of censorship, including pressure on foreign tech companies around commemoration of protest activities. From the 2020 Zoom censorship of a Tiananmen commemoration event organized by my fellow panelist, Zhou Fengsuo, who I hope will be able to join us soon, and others, to the shadow banning of the influential Teacher Lee account on Twitter last year during the 2-year anniversary of the White Paper protest movement. Now, in fact, like clockwork, on the eve of the Tiananmen anniversary, just yesterday, Teacher Li's account was also subjected to a search suggestion ban. Again, the timing being no coincidence. And this morning, I scrolled through a search on X for Li Laoshi, Busher Ni Laoshi, which is the Chinese name of his account, which turned up some 800 impersonator accounts. This level of coordinated inauthentic behavior is designed to game platform algorithms. It's part of Beijing's arsenal. It's a violation of X policies on authenticity. But again, here we really see explicitly how platforms are targets of digital transnational repression and have a long way to go in addressing it. Targeted cyber attacks are also common among the wider diaspora, but in many cases, this spikes around large-scale protest events. World Uyghur Congress or the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy shared many cases of us where Google accounts were threatened by state-backed intrusion, but this also targets many smaller groups who engage in protest. Sky Feng of the Hong Kong Outlanders, a Taiwan-based group, and told Article 19 that their organization's Gmail accounts were targeted also by, suspected state-sponsored intrusion attempts on 14 November 2024 ahead of a planned 16 November protest. And in fact, just last night, actually, I also received a notification from Google of a suspected government-backed attack on my Gmail, not for the first time. Meanwhile, also as part of its digital transnational repression against protest, the PRC engages in information manipulation. Emblematic is PRC efforts to influence global narratives on peaceful protest, such as in 2019 among the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong and its solidarity protests around the world. China launched a coordinated effort to manipulate information on X and Facebook and elsewhere. Graphica identified Spamouflage as the lead actor behind this campaign, which pushed narratives that sought to delegitimize the protests as inauthentic or CIA or foreign funded, the sort of typical tactics employed by authoritarian states to delegitimize so-called color revolutions, and this continues. Now, as protests continue in China and the diaspora, the CCP and its proxies are likely to escalate efforts to harass, silence, and contain global protest. Those targeted by transnational repression live with often protracted paranoia, not knowing who to trust, and fear being targeted themselves or their family facing retaliation. This can contribute to burnout, isolation, and self-censorship. Without concrete measures from host countries and the international community, transnational repression will continue to threaten voices that are critical of China's human rights abuses, engaging in protest. And finally, just in closing, while our report documents a range of threats, we also want to highlight the importance of cross-movement coordination. Many protest leaders and other human rights defenders have emphasized the importance of solidarity, especially between Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Hong Kongers. Malicious actors who seek to weaken a movement create factionalism. Cross-movement solidarity helps break down this paranoia and mistrust, forge durable networks, and support innovation, which in turn fuels sustainability, something we need now more than ever in the face of global funding cuts to civil society. And so as such, I'll just close by acknowledging the importance of ongoing support for coalitions, communication, and community. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing the insights of our Article 19 report and for setting the stage with the report's key finding and also remind us the importance of solidarity. And since now we have Zhou Fengsuo joining us to begin with our first discussion segment, I'm honored to introduce Zhou Fengsuo, Executive Director of the Human Rights in China and the President of Humanitarian China. As a student leader in the 1989 Tiananmen Square, he continues to be a leading voice in the global movement for democracy and freedom. And Fengsuo, I think we would like to begin by asking, from Tiananmen Square to the White Paper movement, how have you seen protests and repression in China evolve over time? And how does these domestic movements influence or became influenced by overseas solidarity protests, particularly among diasporic communities? And additionally, given the role that social media platforms now play, we are very interested to have your thoughts on how overseas users can help document protests and repressions for global audiences, and how this information can circulate back to people inside China who are accessing platforms like X beyond the firewall. And finally, in this dynamic between protest and transnational repression, what kind of responsibilities or complexity do you see technology coming in bearing? Fengsuo, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining together at this moment to commemorate Tiananmen massacre. I was a student. I was the first one to arrive on Tiananmen Square. I was the last one to leave. When I was leaving Tiananmen Square at about this moment, 36 years ago, I remember one last thing. We were driven by tanks, and soldiers were beating us. And with all the chaos, there are a few students who are carrying mimeographic printer. It was heavy. I think it weighs at least 60 pounds. And clunky. It's even though it was considered the most advanced machine at that time, it's still a lot to carry. So I asked them, I said, why do you want to carry this? This is a time of life and death. Just leave. And I was told that this is the most advanced machine we have. We have to keep it to fight another day. At that moment, that was the technology we use to let people know what we are doing, what we are thinking, and why we should get together. Actually, this machine, I would never imagine I could see it again in my lifetime. 2 years ago, it was given to me from a protester then who was one of them who was carrying this mimeographic printer. And it is now at the Tiananmen Museum now in Los Angeles. So I want to mention this because this was the earliest equipment that we can use. Basically, this kind of machine, and mostly manual work to write, to create original copy, to distribute it. And now today, most of the battle fought on internet with keystroke. It was a lot harder at that time, and that's why at that moment, this machine was precious, even though it was time of life and death. And actually, they carried this machine on the back of a bicycle, and then they were approached on Chang'an Avenue by tanks. They escaped the tank massacre, which killed more than 10 students on Tiananmen Square and injured Fang Zheng, who is my friend now in San Francisco Bay Area, one of the most important witness of Tiananmen 1989. The mother of this protester kept it till her death, and then his sister kept it in secret and smuggled out. Now it's one of the most precious moment I remember from Tiananmen years. 36 years have passed. This has always been a battle to spread the truth against forced amnesia, government erosion of memory. And now today, we are looking at the internet. The main, I think, if you open Twitter, Chinese Twitter today, the timeline is basically flowing with all the Tiananmen messages. Yeah. This is the latest battleground now. And that's where not only we are keeping the truth of Tiananmen intact, away from government censorship, we are also influencing China, because there are always millions of people. I think my estimate is like 50 million people using internet to get information. And days like today is one of the most important days. And that's when the GFW, the mechanism that enslaves Chinese people in cyberspace, is strongest. But that's also the time when Chinese people are most thirst for information. So I think Peter Lee is the most important case here. His account recently surpassed 2 million users after staying below 2 million for a long time. Just recent days, finally it broke about 2 million. Even though his followers have been questioned by police, Chinese police use all the technology trying to map out each and everyone who followed him. And they actually questioned people, their family, even though they are using Twitter from outside of China. That's the kind of pressure they are putting on every follower. But even with all this, he has 2 million followers. And it shows that people are trying to get information at a huge risk. And also, it's important that people want to know more about Tiananmen at exactly this moment. But for now, I think as Michael has noted, this is also when the battle is fought very fiercely. I just saw that there are hundreds of fake accounts of Teacher Lee. But what's worse, I think, is that he was shadow banned 5 times this month by Twitter for unknown reasons. And I think this is where we are looking at whether this information, this truth about Tiananmen could reach more people or not on Twitter. Even though people are trying to find Teacher Lee, a new user will be confused when looking at all these fake accounts. And with that, the reduced flow, there is a systematic nature into it. So we used to be able to reach out to Twitter on these issues, but the communication channel is gone now after Elon Musk took over. I think the whole team was let go. So, another example is that my friend Fengsuo, he was one of the most important leaders on Tiananmen Square. He was also on the government's most wanted list. His account was stopped 2 years ago. He can't log on, he can't use it anymore, and banned forever. And I knew many activists who are banned by Twitter from opening their accounts And I try to ask Twitter, there's no support anymore. Yeah, very rarely we get some response at some accounts, but to a larger scale, most of these problems we are suffering in some way kind of similar to the censorship within the wall. That's what we are facing. On the other hand, recent years, we are seeing that there's an evolution on the other side from the fake accounts, for example, of CCP. Yes, they used to be these bot accounts. For a while, it was pornographic accounts that will, they will flood any one, like any tweet that's important with pornographic messages, so it would not be readable. And recent years, I think it's getting a lot more sophisticated. They have real accounts made by real people that normally just tells their daily life. But if you look closely, many of these accounts, they are broadcasting CCP's message. For example, these accounts from Xinjiang, the Uyghur region, they'll talk about good food, beautiful scenery, all that. So if you look at these accounts, it will be a completely different picture. That's what CCP want to present. And they are adapting and learning what people outside are doing, and they're trying to get into this sanctuary of free speech with their influencers. And this is happening on Twitter, also to similar degree on YouTube, which is another major battleground for information. So I'll go back to the question of the influence on China from outside, from the cyberspace. White paper protest shows that outside China can influence China within and then create meaningful, impactful changes in China. What happened in 2022, the white paper protest, is very similar to Tiananmen in that it was a very large gathering for people and with a consensus against CCP's repression. But on the white paper protest, the main gathering place is Tiananmen Square. It's the virtual Tiananmen Square. That's on Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, Instagram, instead of the physical Tiananmen Square. And the accounts like Teacher Li are playing a crucial role, like what I did 36 years ago. I set up the broadcast station on Tiananmen Square. We covered Tiananmen Square with loudspeakers, with strong voice. For the first time in Chinese history, people's real voice can be heard at the very center of China's political system. And now it's on Twitter that people gather. So accounts like Teacher Li, exactly like that. People come to Teacher Li with real information about what they are protesting. And from there, people gather they get new information. And so that's why I called this cloud protest or cloud revolution number 2. Why? Because this actually was the second time that a gathering in the virtual space brought a protest on the street in China. The first time was 2011. We call the Jasmine Revolution. This was the echoing effect of the Jasmine Revolution, the Arab Spring in 2011. Yeah. At that time, there wasn't an economic crisis. Okay, I'll wrap up quite soon. So I think what white paper tells us and the Jasmine Revolution says is that internet free and safe from CCP censorship is a crucial battleground. And with the platforms like Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Chinese people can get information. And there are many millions who are doing this at this moment. And that's how changes will come to China because of outside activities. Another effect this creates is that outside diaspora activism matters a lot more than the number, because it creates a staging effect. There are always tens of millions of people who are watching at, for example, the white paper protest in London and the protest in New York City. That's how people get the message of protest. During the white paper protest, that's how Peng Lifa's message could spread like fire, eventually brought people to streets in Shanghai, Beijing, even though he was arrested immediately on October 13, and his voice was silenced completely within China. This is why internet cyberspace fight is so crucial now. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Fengsuo, for not sharing with us your personal story on Tiananmen Square, but also the importance of having online space as a critical battleground for the future of advocacy and activism. I think for the next, we are turning to the issue for collective punishments and digital repression, particularly in the context of Uyghur, Tibetan, and Hong Kong activism abroad. We are joined by Zumretay Arkin, Vice President of the World Uyghur Congress and a leading global advocate exposing CCP's cross-border intimidation tactics. As highlighted in the report, we see many overseas protesters have had their families back home punished for their participation, sometimes merely for attending peaceful demonstrations in Europe or North America. Zumretay, could you tell us how this strategy of collective punishments affects the Uyghur protest movement globally? And as a follow-up, the report also notes that the protesters abroad are often first identified through surveillance technologies and then reported to the authorities in China. Can you speak more broadly to how digital transnational repression manifests from surveillance to cyber attacks and how it is impacting the Uyghur movement and others? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to first thank Article 19 for organizing such an important event. I think June 4th every year is an incredible, important reminder of why our fight matters. And I think yours decades later, where we haven't actually, things have just gotten worse in China and in its occupied territories, including East Turkestan. So for Uyghurs, I mean, transnational repression is nothing new. It's always been embedded in our community. I remember even in the 90s, even in the beginning of 2000s, in those like golden eras, you know, for Uyghurs, it was always an issue, you know, and people were always cautious. I remember attending my first protest as a 10-year-old kid, firstly immigrated to Canada, and we were wearing masks and all kinds of things to disguise our identity, because we knew that the Chinese embassy folks would be taking photos or via other proxies. So it was always an issue. But I think what is different today is that it's so widespread across communities, not only ours, but also Tibetan communities, the Hong Kong community, Southern Mongolian, mainland Chinese communities. So I think the issue has just escalated further, but also the digital aspect has also evolved, and I think we're seeing a lot more, you know, digital repression, and especially with new technologies and softwares that are being developed, especially with AI nowadays, transnational repression is extremely easy. People are extremely easy to target, especially if you're already in the public space. I think you've become an automatic target, but also just normal, ordinary citizens. So if you look at the Uyghur community, any individual is a target for the Chinese government, and the collective punishment is, of course, one of the key things. I mean, when the mass repression and mass arbitrary detention started in 2017, it was, if you look at some of the leaked documents that were leaked over the last few years, a lot of the people who were detained because of the in connection to their relatives abroad, either for their work in advocacy, but also just for example, contacting their relatives who don't even have any political or advocacy background, for sending money abroad, for you know, communicating with different people and different friends who are living in Western countries or even in Muslim majority countries, which was an aggravated risk. So it's, if you look at it, it's really extensive and broad, and anything can, you know, make you become a target, basically, just based on your ethnic identity. But I think coming back to the issue of TNR, I mean, like I said, it's the tools have really become more sophisticated, developed, and what is really at risk here is that now it's happening a lot more in Western democracies. So, I mean, I think Western governments, Western democracies need to treat this as a matter of national security and an infringement on their sovereignty as well, because I think it's really abhorrent that the government of China is not being held accountable for threatening, harassing, whether physically or digitally, citizens of other countries, especially in Western democracies. If we look at also recent trends that we have observed in our community is character assassinations. A lot of that has happened over the last few years, specifically targeting individuals who are very much public facing, Uyghur leaders, Uyghur human rights defenders, and really coming to them. And especially there's also the gender angle to this, because women have been also targeted, and the character assassinations that are related to you know, attacks against women and girls are around slut shaming, or reputational damage. So I've actually been victim of this. So there was a deepfake about me a couple months ago, just before our General Assembly. And it was actually the first time that we observed the use of deepfake or AI to attack members of our community. And then, of course, there's, like I said, character assassination of all kinds. And there are also disinformation, misinformation campaigns, slander campaigns that have been cited, which have become almost, like a free pass and used quite extensively. And then of course use of surveillance technology. So we see this very clearly through even social media apps within China, for example, with WeChat. I mean, all conversations are monitored. I mean, for Uyghurs, that's a guarantee, and that's been happening even before the whole repression started. We were aware at a very young age that anything we say on WeChat would be recorded. And then, of course, in 2016, when the then party governor in the region, Chen Chuangguo, has implemented the whole surveillance system, sophisticated surveillance system that and creating also apps like the Integrated Joint Operative Platform, which basically collects all sensitive data of people, of Uyghur families and Uyghur individuals, and sends it to a central database, which then serves the local authorities, the local police, to target specific individuals, because the data records things like behaviors like, what their daily routines, their gas consumption, their electricity consumption. And leaked documents have actually proven that families or households that have consumed too much electricity in a month, they were accused of basically fabricating bombs or aiding terrorism, things like this. So trumped up charges. But we also see it increasingly with Western social media apps like WhatsApp, which is become actually a tool to repress against Uyghurs, like because it's widely used in the Uyghur community as well as in the Tibetan community. So there have been, for example, installment of malwares or links that have been shared, which are also basically viruses that infect people's phones. Spyware, of course, but then if you also look at the more traditional methods of TNR, we have the harassment from the Chinese police, so directly police from China or East Turkestan who will call people in foreign countries to basically intimidate them and harass them. The method is very simple. They will do a video call, usually through WeChat. They will be either the police themselves, they will call that person, or they will ask their relatives to call them, and then they will appear in a video. So it's not very direct, but it's a way to say, we're watching your family, so watch what you're doing, because we have control over here about their whereabouts, their fate. So they do it in a very subtle way, but then of course it really is traumatizing, because you don't know what's going to happen to them. And the other way of doing that, I think, which is not very much discussed, is sometimes they will, because Uyghurs, for the most part, since 2017, we've lost contact with all our relatives back home. But then sometimes the Chinese police or the Public Security Bureau of officials will use that to their advantage to say, look, if you stop your activism, we're going to actually put you in touch with your family members that you haven't spoken to in years. And that's something that we've observed a lot, especially after 2019, especially now, I think in the last 2 years, when the Chinese has relaxed some of their travel policies to the region. So, and it works to some extent, because of course people want to reconnect with their family members, and as a result of that, we've in the Uyghur activism space, we've lost a lot of human rights defenders, we've lost a lot of activists because of these ongoing challenges of transnational repression. And I mean, there's just so much more that I could touch on this, but I think the surveillance technology, yes, they're using this to take, of course, photos of protesters abroad, or even infiltrating events in diaspora communities to send, of course, back to China, where their relatives are then targeted. There's also, I think, the Chinese, surveillance cameras with facial recognition technology that can also track Uyghur individuals back home. And these technologies are also increasingly being exported outside of China. So if you look at the Balkans, in Serbia, these technologies are used. Even sometimes, Huawei cameras are used in Europe, even at the European Parliament or elsewhere. So that's deeply concerning, and I think that's something that that governments, especially democracies, need to be aware of when they're signing these contracts. And I think for especially Uyghur NGOs, Uyghur organizations, it's for us, our security is extremely, extremely important. Just this, I think 1 hour ago, one of our colleagues' email password was trying to be, they try to steal his email password, and every other week I receive government-backed attacks on my email. So these are lived realities and real challenges that we face more and more. For us, security is a process, and we need continuous tech support, and we need people, researchers, to monitor these threats, to also analyze the threats, where it's coming from, the sources, and also we need tangible support in terms of not only funding but also like equipment, and also training in terms of digital security, not only for Uyghur organizations but also I think the wider Uyghur diaspora community, because I think that those of us who are very much at the forefront, we have a pretty good understanding of the risks, but the average Uyghur in a community anywhere doesn't. So I think there needs to be much better work at raising awareness within our own communities. And I think this is where perhaps we can work within, cross-movement solidarity. I think this is where we could really work together to enhance awareness, but also our own securities.
Thank you so much, Zumretay, for not only pointing out different struggles and difficulty that the CCP has been imposed on the Uyghur movement worldwide, but also pointing us about very actionable directions about how we can improve the activism and the advocacy and the work that we do. Thank you so much. And for the next one, I will turn to I-Chen. Our final discussion will focus on a less visible but deeply felt impact of the transnational repression, which will be the psychosocial harm. Today we are joined by I-Chen Lau. She's a researcher, advocate, and former team lead at Doublethink Lab, who has worked extensively on Hong Kong diaspora organizing. And I-Chen, based on your experience with the overseas Hong Kong protest community and beyond, what are some of the most concerning ways that long-term transnational repression is affecting the mental health, resilience, and the sustainability of the protest movements? And additionally, what are the biggest challenges to addressing these harms, both within the communities themselves and from the perspective of a policymaker in host countries who might not fully understand this layered repression? Please share with us your insight. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. So first and foremost, thank you to Article 19 for organizing this excellent panel about a very important topic on the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And congratulations for the launch of the report. I had a chance to read it and it's excellent. So to give a bit of context to my research on transnational repression and its psychosocial harms, I served as an advisor to Alliance Canada Hong Kong from 2020 to 2023. And during that time, I had started to see the impacts of transnational repression on advocacy. Particularly, one notable incident was after the launch of ACHK, our executive director, Sherry Wong, received a threatening phone call at her hotel room, which was actually booked under a different name as a safety precaution. When she picked up the phone, An anonymous voice demanded that she leave immediately and that they were coming to collect her before hanging up. This left the organization on high alert and everyone was shocked. And for Sherry, it began to instill an awareness of how her advocacy was making her a target despite living in Canada. We had other notable incidents as well. ACHK has a report from 2020 that also looked into tactics targeting Hong Kong protesters during some global solidarity rallies. I myself also started to notice some strange incidents. The most notable was that I had a number of friends who had received bizarre phone calls after speaking with me via video call or phone. They said that when they picked up the phone, someone would just be breathing heavily on the other end of the phone before hanging up. And this would consistently happen each time I had hung up or had ended a phone call with them. This, I'm not going to lie, that definitely left me rattled. And I also realized that my advocacy was not only making myself a target, but also my friends and my loved ones. Having this lived experience of transnational repression and advocacy informed my research with Doublethink Lab, and I was quite keen to examine the psychosocial impacts of TNR and the challenges it poses to overseas advocacy. So in 2023, Doublethink Lab released a report called Silenced Voices, Hidden Struggles, where we interviewed Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Chinese dissidents who lived overseas about the tactics they observed of TNR targeting their communities and its impact. Also, just to clarify, TNR is transnational repression. I use it interchangeably as well. While all the activists we interviewed stated that their intention was to continue their advocacy, they had felt a strong sense of responsibility to continue. They also noted that TNR had a significant impact on their mental health and overall well-being. The majority of our participants reported significant stress and anxiety, high levels of burnout, a sense of powerlessness, increased distrust of one's community as well, and isolation. I also wanted to point out that these psychosocial impacts exacerbate one another, and it sometimes leads to a vicious cycle. So an example of this might be the stress and anxiety that you feel that stems from TNR can also increase feelings of burnout, which could lead to, let's say, more infighting within communities, weakening the resilience of overseas advocacy. Increased distrust of one's community could lead you to have further isolation from your own social networks and supports, which then in turn could worsen your mental health and might make someone withdraw from advocacy altogether. So when I think about the stress and anxiety from TNR, this is my own personal observation from my research throughout the years, I tend to categorize it into three broad categories. The stress and anxiety of anticipation of TNR happening, the stress from harassment, both physical and digital, and the stress of constant surveillance. So a number of participants in Doublethink Lab and in also Article 19's report noted that they had to constantly anticipate whether it be the potential for physical attacks or surveillance at sites. Zumretay also pointed out that she had noted people were using face masks to obscure their identity because it was a well-known tactic that at sites of protests, people would take photos to be sent to the Chinese embassy for surveillance. I noted that some had stated that they stuck to large groups in case of attack, a physical attack that does occur. And one participant in my research had noted they go through a list of pre-protest safety checks in order to make sure things were okay. That include also going to the site of protest to ensure that they didn't see any potential for counter-protesters to come in to intimidate. So this also means that activists are under constant surveillance, and that leads to significant stressors. Anna Kwok in the report stated that the psychological impact of TNR is akin to a 24/7 alarm in your head, and that leads to further suspicion and paranoia. You become very cautious about everything. This is a mentally taxing state to be in constantly. This also affects your day-to-day activities. I've had participants note that they do not like to go out alone ever. They try to plan, they do safety checks. It's just a constant being on guard all the time. This also can exacerbate other existing, coexisting, or previous mental health issues, such as PTSD, which was noted to be one of the mental health struggles that was commonly reported, and depression. We had also noted that there was high levels of burnout within the China human rights advocacy space. So this can result into other challenges, such as sustaining long-term advocacy as people choose to leave, or they just cannot find themselves motivated enough to continue on. The stress and anxiety of harassment, particularly in a digital realm, is quite significant. In the digital realm, harassment is a low-cost, low-effort endeavor that can happen continuously as well, too. This can look like leaving death and rape threats, insults, sexually explicit and harassing messages, or threats to dox an individual that happens at a fast rate. We also see that particularly in the gender dimension for women, they're also dealing with another psychosocial impact in which that they also have to deal with narratives, attacks that are related to the weaponization of their gender. Some narratives include a lot that are discrediting their credibility simply because they're women, quite misogynistic narratives. Others also extend into weaponizing their personal lives, such as the slut-shaming narratives. One narrative I have noted anecdotally is that many ethnically Chinese women who are activists or within the space, such as journalists as well too, if it is, some of these trolls will go in and try to look into who you are dating. If they discover it's a white man in particular, they use that as a weaponization, or they use the narrative that you're only engaging in human rights advocacy because you're looking for the validation of men, particularly white men. Those are narratives that have popped up, and certainly these attacks are another form of mental anguish and stressors for activists. But of course, the majority of participants in our research noted that the most impactful tactic of TNR is when family members or friends in the PRC or PRC occupied territories are summoned to be interrogated by the state police for an activist advocacy abroad. Some people have stated that this kind of has an effect. It affects an individual level and also your families and your friends nearby. So it will cause a sense of fear among people. So the next time you want to go out to protest, you will think twice. You will be more cautious. That is the one thing the Chinese government is successful in doing. I think also, in Article 19's report, I myself mentioned how this leads to sort of a cognitive dissonance in which, while you want to stand up for your values and beliefs, your advocacy, you are acutely aware of the fact your advocacy could jeopardize your loved ones and friends. This adds to the mental load and burden of advocates as they have to constantly think about and navigate whether they should continue their advocacy or not, whether or not the next time they go to a protest, are they going to receive a call from the Chinese state police, or whether they're going to receive a call from their family members who they know they might be detained at that point. So this also leads to another phenomenon of self-censorship in which people are choosing to not speak out because it seems to be a much more rational choice than endangering their loved ones. I think, and you don't want people to be affected by your actions, especially if they're abroad. So I think some people feel that the cost of speaking out is far greater than the cost of staying silent. A lot of our participants had noted as well that one of the ways to safeguard their friends and family members was to just sever personal ties completely. But this also leads to an erosion of community networks and social support, which can then also exacerbate mental health issues. So we might see a decrease in resiliency or sustainability overseas as we contribute to further isolation. Many participants noted for me that they do not know who to turn to, who to talk to. And because of the paranoia and suspicion that stems from TNR, they also feel much less trust. They are not willing to trust their own community as well. This is also exacerbated by the fact that we see the PRC likes to co-opt community members for lateral surveillance. It's not just top-down surveillance where the state security is surveilling activists. We see the co-optation of others in their own community, in their social networks, trusted members as well too. And I think Article 19's report does a great job in illustrating how family members are even co-opted into pressuring an activist to stop their advocacy, and activists noting that they do believe their family members are being coerced to do so. I think one thing that I just wanted to leave you on as well, just keeping an eye on time is here too, is that there's a quote that has always stuck with me in my research, which is this quote: "I think it's been like a 2-year-long nightmare that never ends. It's like a haunting feeling, right? It's not always on your mind, but then when it is, you're stuck with that thought. You're obsessing over, okay, well, should I maybe stop doing this advocacy? Like I mentioned earlier, that self-doubt just never stops playing in the back of your head, and it's just annoying and torturing." The good optimistic part is I have seen an increase in actually more people going out to protests. I think the sustainability is there. It seems that more and more people are coming out, understanding the risks of TNR as well too, which I think is quite important, and also engaging in community practices to keep their communities safe. But some of the biggest obstacles I have also seen in addressing TNR is that we still lack appropriate and targeted mental health supports and social supports. This is something governments still struggle to understand. They may just give a blanket recommendation for a counselor that might not be culturally appropriate, that might also not understand the very special situation of transnational repression. I think also we still somewhat lack safe and secure spaces to bring together those affected by TNR, to have further discussions of this on a community level. And I think there also is a need to continue to build solidarity, as it was mentioned before, with other communities. I also want to draw attention to, I think it would be good to also think about expanding to see some of our other neighbors within the Indo-Pacific region, as digital transnational repression is also prevalent in this area, particularly such as Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand. There is a need to continue to build the solidarity in order to increase the effectiveness of advocacy. I am someone who also firmly believes strength in numbers as well too. I will leave it for there, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, I-Chen, for sharing with us and provide your research about the psychosocial impact of TNR and what they can do to the people who are on the front line of activism, and also showing again the importance of solidarity. And I think for the next part, we are moving on to recommendations. So right now we will turn briefly to the final recommendation, and each speakers will have 2 minutes to share one focused recommendation based on what we have discussed today. It can be focusing governments, it can be focusing tech companies, and it could be also recommendation for the international communities. And once again, for our participants here today, if you have any questions and comments, please feel free to type them in the QA functions of the Teams. Okay. And I think for the first recommendation, I will start with Michael, particularly on your recommendation to the tech sector. Then we'll go by the order of Fengsuo, Zumretay, and I-Chen. Thank you. I guess I will start with you, Michael.
Thank you. And wow, really, it's been a pleasure just listening to all three of you also sharing your expertise and your passion. So again, thank you for joining us. In the report, we offer recommendations sort of targeted at the CCP, such as it is. Not that we expect them to listen, but we offer them. Also host governments and tech companies. But of course, for the sake of this conversation, I'll just sort of focus a little bit on sort of recommendations or thoughts to tech companies, and sort of both as we highlighted in the report, as I touched on briefly, and as Fengsuo and obviously the others have also touched on. There's a significant role that social media, email clients, web hosts, various tech companies have as vectors for as digital transnational repression, where it takes place, and also then it requires action, identification. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and a number of these companies themselves already have corporate human rights policies that acknowledge the corporate responsibility for human rights. And as such, we call on the tech community, tech companies, to really do more, to adhere to their existing voluntary commitments under the UN Guiding Principles, their own policies, and so forth, but to do more to identify, to establish within their corporate policies, within their throughout their whole operations, greater identification for and provisions for tackling digital transnational repression, throughout their supply chain, throughout their corporate operations, throughout their platforms, and so forth. And again, I think it's again critical that this isn't just an issue where it's about one social media company, but also looking at the larger tech ecosystem and seeing how this also relates, of course, to supply chain issues, and that companies where they are both providing hardware that has, say, app stores that relate to censorship of what's available on their app stores, but also the production of their devices relying on forced labor, for example, up to then issues around incomplete content moderation policies that don't even adhere to their own policies on authenticity, such as the case with X, and the search suggestion ban of accounts like Teacher Lee. So largely we argue for, again, the targeted acknowledgement and provisions for tackling digital transnational repression throughout tech companies' operations and their policies. But, and as is our mandate, I would be remiss not to emphasize that any measures by tech companies or otherwise to address these threats also must be in line with human rights standards on the permissible limitations of freedom of expression and information. And just that sometimes we see that otherwise well-meaning policies don't always adhere to the permissible limitations on freedom of expression and access to information. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michael. And for the next one, I will turn to Fengsuo. What will be your one recommendation to today's issue? Thank you.
Well, the top recommendation I would recommend to all tech companies is to work with human rights community who work on China issues, because CCP's China is the dominant threat to the world now, both physically as well as in the technology cyberspace. And we are at the front line, the battleground, and we have a deep experience. I think that's where tech companies can benefit a lot from communications to stay on top of the issues is to CCP's invasion. I think that's very important. If I can follow on that, I'll add one more. That I think the role of tech company. AirDrop was widely used during the white paper protest, and it was effective. We know hundreds of people were put in prison because simply for spreading message using similar tools like this. And then Apple came out basically restricting the way it's used in China and applied it globally, like within 2 weeks of what's happening. I always ask for investigation into how Apple make this decision. From the examples of Zoom, which was implicated in the indictment by FBI against Jin Xinjiang, it's clear that for every company that works in China, there is a direct liaison with the Ministry of State Security that's in that indictment. We want to know how the tech companies are working with Chinese government in censoring, in surveillance. I think that's one area where we always need more information.
Thank you, Fengsuo. And I think for the next one, I will turn to Zumretay. And for your recommendation, it can be targeting policymakers, can be for tech companies, or it can be for the international civil society actors.
Sure, thank you so much. I think just to build on some of these recommendations that are really helpful, I think, like I said, there needs to be, we need to encourage our own communities to not normalize this phenomenon, because it's something that we see over and over again in our communities, where people are so used to this idea or these incidents that they treat it as just anything, any normal thing. And we need to kind of really break that cycle. We need to encourage them to report, to document as much as possible, because that's how we'll be able to use some of the available mechanisms that are now being created in some of the Western democracies. Because, for example, in Germany, there's this hotline that's been created by the Interior Ministry. But if people don't report through that hotline, then the government is going to think that there's not an issue with the community. There's no such thing as TNR. And then, of course, there needs to be training all across different agencies. So not only at the foreign ministry level or interior ministry, but also through different departments, different ministries, and down to law enforcement agencies. Because one thing that we've seen a lot over the years is that, some people have called the police, and the police doesn't know how to deal with instances of digital repression, digital TNR. So that's one thing. The other thing is for Western governments to issue travel advisories about states that are engaging in transnational repression. That includes China. Officials who are directly involved with this. And also for, I think, for specifically the restriction of surveillance technology, export of censorship technology as well. I think this is incredibly important, because that's what allows governments like China to carry out that repression beyond their borders. And then, of course, lastly, to really have resources allocated, including funding, but also tangible like workshops or other spaces to give to civil society and vulnerable communities.
Thank you so much, Zumretay, for your recommendations. And for the last one, I will turn to I-Chen. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to expand on Article 19's recommendation to expand state funding for psychosocial and community support to ensure efforts to counter TNR prioritizes marginalized communities as well. And I think it's important to fund more research into the psychological impacts of TNR and in its various forms, whether that's digital or physical, and to also fund research into appropriate therapeutic interventions to develop a mental health curriculum for practitioners as well. I have a mental health background, a social work background, counseling background. I don't believe that this is something widely discussed among mental health practitioners. And because now we're seeing much more increase, especially in multicultural countries like Canada and UK and the US, we definitely need to have much more culturally appropriate and situation appropriate therapeutic interventions being taught. And I'll end it there.
Thank you, I-Chen. And since we still have a little bit of time, I will now turn the floor to the participant tonight and see if you have any questions to our presenters here today. You can type in the Q&A sections, and I will assign the questions to the presenter here. And if not, then I would just really appreciate that our presenters are joining here with us today, especially to our participants who are also interested on these issues, from Tiananmen to the white paper movement, from surveillance targeting Uyghur to Hong Kong exile communities. We have heard today how the protest remains both a vital form of expression and a growing target of transnational repression. And just before we close, I want to invite everyone else to explore the report that Article 19 just launched, Going Global, China's Transnational Repression of Protesters Worldwide. You can find it on Article 19 website. And thank you again for being with us today. Have a good day, evening, or a good night. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Article 19.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks, everyone.